What's up, everybody? How's it going? Welcome to the Tech Interview Guide live stream. Tonight's going to be all about resumes. I'm basically going to take my gigantic resume and show you how I'm going to coach people to build a junior level dev, entry level dev resume at a workshop this coming Thursday. And so I'm going to go through kind of the steps that I would take, and just, a couple of ideas around formatting, and a couple of ideas around like what to put on there, why to put it on there, and so on. As per usual, all these opinions are my own. I am the Director of Engineering Learning at Getstream.io, which is this cool little 3D printed logo back here, the little paper boat. You can check out Getstream.io for an API to make cool live chat and newsfeed integration into your app. But my opinions are my own. They are not those of my employer. And the workshop that I'm going to be doing is basically going to be focusing on both resumes and LinkedIn specifically for new developers trying to get that first tech job. Because that first tech job is really, really hard to get. And we don't sugarcoat that at all here on the stream. And so tonight what I want to do is kind of share my thoughts, some of what I'm going to present at this workshop on Thursday around my ideas about how to put a tech resume together. So we're going to basically take my, 20 plus year resume. I kind of cut and pasted a lot of it in here, and it's big, it's enormous. It's like 4 pages long, goes through a lot of my history, and basically I'm going to show you how I'm going to change it up to be like a fake junior level kind of resume. And the folks that are coming to the workshop are basically going to take this ginormous resume and trim it down to 1 page. And I'm going to talk about the reasons why and the kind of stuff that we're going to do in there. And then talk about what I specifically look for in a resume. So as a hiring manager, having been a hiring lead, part of interview panels, being a hiring manager myself, being a director of engineering, all this kind of stuff, I've got opinions on what I like to see in a resume and what order I like to see things in a resume. And I want to try to kind of balance that a little bit with what we know about applicant tracking systems and how they're going to look at resumes. But also we've had people on the stream from HR positions and the kinds of things that they look for in resumes. So if you got any questions at all about resumes, please drop them in chat. I will address those as we go. If you've got just general questions about interview prep or career coaching, things like that about the tech industry, you're welcome to drop that in chat at any time as well. I will try to address those kind of as we go. But tonight's focus is mostly going to be around resumes. So it doesn't mean you can't ask questions if you don't have a resume specific question, but most of the content tonight is going to be just around resumes. Probably be an hour and a half. We'll see how far this gets. It's going to be kind of me working on the resume and explaining what I'm doing kind of as I go. And, like I said, the kinds of things that I like to see in resumes as we go. All right. So most of my talks, I would typically start them off with opinions are like armpits. Everybody's got a couple and some of them stink. That's the PG-13 version. There's a less family-friendly version of that saying. But I'm a big fan of the armpit one, and I've got a really cool picture that I'm going to be showing in the slide deck at the workshop that hopefully get a couple of giggles or groans out of them at least. So let's talk a little bit about what my goal is here for this resume. So I already mentioned I'm going to be giving them this fake resume, and it's going to be this really, really long resume. And why I'm giving them a long form resume and then having them trim it back down to 1 page. The idea here is something that I've been teaching for quite a few years through Turing and just other coaching that I do. The idea here kind of comes back to a riddle that I actually heard when I was a little kid. I was 8 years old, and I bought one of these little joke books. And there was a joke in there, a riddle in there that has stuck with me. And once I got into the tech industry and I started doing career coaching, this particular riddle came to mind. And so now I use it all the time. And it basically goes like this. How do you make a sculpture of an elephant? You start with a giant block of stone or concrete and you chip away everything that doesn't look like an elephant. And so my goal here with the resume preparation is I'm going to show you how to basically build a really, really long resume. And this is what I'm going to be talking about at the workshop on Thursday. We're going to build a really big resume similar to the one that I'm showing on the stream right now. It's going to be huge. It's going to be enormous. It's going to be at least 2, if not 3+ pages long. Now, the more experience you have, the more projects you've done, the more kinds of tools that you've used, the more things you want to explain, the longer that resume is going to be, and that's okay. But this is not the resume that you're going to send out to jobs. This is not the resume you're going to use to go apply for a job. What we're going to do is this is going to be our big block of stone. When we're ready to go apply for a job, we're going to take this really long resume, we're going to make a copy of it, we're going to trim it back down to one page. And so what I'm going to do over the course of the evening is I'm going to show you how I'm going to build up this resume, ways that I might do some basic formatting and sort of layout on the page, but I'm not going to do very much in the way of layout because a resume doesn't have to be, really tricked out as far as layout and formatting goes. But then we're going to go find like a fake job post. We'll see if we can find a job post for an entry-level dev, and I'm going to show you how I would trim this back down then to that one page, like how I would make a copy and how I'd trim it down to one page, specifically for what that kind of company is going to be looking for. Cool. So we're going to get started with that, and as always, if you got questions, drop those in chat, and let's get going with this. All right, so obviously we need our name on the resume. This is probably the only thing that I would put in all caps on the page. Aside from that, we generally want like mixed caps. Maybe the headings could be capitalized, but we're going to play around with font sizes later on. But what I want to talk about here is the kinds of things that I would want to see on a resume and what's important, what's not important, and so on. We've talked on the stream about how when you apply for this job, your resume is probably going to go into an applicant tracking system and then seen by lots of different kinds of people. And so we need to try to format the resume in a way that's going to appeal to the people that are going to be looking at it, but also have all the keywords necessary for the applicant tracking system to figure out what it is we claim to know. Keep in mind, anything on the resume is fair game to ask you in the interview. So if you don't really know it, should it really be on the resume? Probably not. If I, spend an afternoon trying to learn Java, I'm probably not going to put Java on my resume because they're going to look at that and go, oh, you're a Java developer. Cool. Let me ask you all kinds of questions. Like when would you choose to use an entry set over a key set when iterating over a hash? It's like, I have no idea why I would choose one over the other. And those kinds of things are going to make you look bad in the interview. So if you can't speak to common technical interview questions about a topic, that shouldn't be on your resume. And so I'm going to go through like some of the things that I would expect to see and so on, kind of as we build this thing out. Once it gets through the applicant tracking system, then probably someone in HR is going to see it, and then they'll usually pass that on to a hiring manager. Now HR is going to want to see certain things on the resume quickly, and then as a hiring manager, I would want to see certain things kind of quickly. Those things don't always line up. HR people may care about like where you went to school or what kind of education background you have that qualifies you for this job, where a hiring manager may want to look more at the skills that you have and do you have the skills necessary to do the job. There may be some overlap in there, but if you put things out of order and they have to really look on that page to try to find it, they're probably just going to pass on the resume. They're going to look at like the ATS is going to hit it and say this resume matches for a Ruby developer or a JavaScript developer. And they're going to look at it and go, well, where on here does it say JavaScript? Like it's hard to see. It's not really apparent that you're a JavaScript developer. They're going to pass on the resume. Or maybe they find what they're looking for. Okay, they've got certifications in this thing, or they've learned some web development kinds of tools. All right, let's pass that on to the hiring manager. And the hiring manager's like, cool, I need someone that knows JavaScript and TDD, maybe a good Git workflow, things like that. But that's really hard to see, or the skills are like way down at the bottom of the page and they're kind of buried. It's going to make it much harder for them to look at or to find what they're looking for. And so they're more likely to pass on the resume. And so trying to please everybody is really hard. There's no one resume format out there that's going to win everybody over. So don't just listen to my advice. Listen to the advice of lots of people, because the more perspectives you hear about how to build a resume, the more you can kind of choose your own path. And that's what I'm all about here on the stream. This isn't just a stream of, this is how Ian says you should do it and you should only do it Ian's way. That's not at all what I'm doing here. I'm just here to give my perspective and say this is one way that you could do it. But you really need to get that advice and that input from a lot of different people so that you can form your own opinion. So don't just listen to me. Don't just listen to like that one person at your school, or don't just listen to this one person that looked at a resume once 10 years ago. You kind of have to get input and feedback from a lot of people, and then decide like, what do we really want put on there. So the kinds of things that I look for as a hiring manager, I'm looking for things like, skills and projects. Have you ever been employed before? And then like what kind of education do you have? So really, as a hiring manager, I would look for, what do you claim to know? Where have you practiced it, and where have you learned it? And that practice could be on-the-job experience, or it could be an internship, or it could be project-based work. And then where did you learn it? That would be education. For me as a hiring manager, I never cared about where you went to school. There are hiring managers and HR people out there that do care about where you go to school. They've got a bias about schools that they think have a better education, or it might be their alma mater. And they're like, well, I went to that school, so that school is awesome, and I'm just going to interview everybody from that school. Well, that's a dangerous precedent to set, and it's a dangerous privilege and a dangerous bias, and honestly a prejudice against everybody else applying that didn't go to that school. And so companies shouldn't care about where you got your education. All they should care about is, do you have the skill, and can you do the job? Heartbender, good to see you on the stream. Thanks for saying hello in chat. Cool. So, and then as a hiring manager, again, education could also break into like certifications. Like, did you get like an AWS certification or some kind of, security certification, things along those lines? And then do you have other work experience that could be beneficial to my team? And HR will also be looking for those kinds of things as well. But as a hiring manager, that's kind of the order I look for. I look for skills, projects, and then like work experience, and then education. HR will probably look for any relevant work experience, and then education, and then maybe the skills, because those are the things that are going to be important to them in that order. But then they're going to give that resume to a hiring manager. And so what order do we put these on the page? And I'm going to be going through some of that kind of as I shape up this resume, kind of as we go here. So we're going to put our skills block above projects. So I'm just going to rearrange some of this stuff here. So for those just joining the stream, basically I'm taking a really long version of an old resume of mine from about a decade ago, because I've been in the industry now for 25 years. So I'm basically taking this resume that's when I was in the industry for about 15 years. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into like a junior dev kind of resume, where it's going to be mostly project-based learning and experience around being like a web developer or something like that, or getting into like a back-end development or a full stack kind of development kind of role. And it's going to be a really long resume. It's going to be more than one page on purpose. And then I'm going to show you, now that we have this long resume, we're going to trim it down to one page. And so what I've got on here is I've got kind of a summary, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to rewrite it. And then I've got my skills, and I've got my projects, and then I've got related work experience. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to trim all this stuff out. And then I've got like other work experience. For me, when I was listing this stuff out as like related work experience, this is when I was looking for a web development job, where this other work experience down here was like my firmware development, like really low level assembly, and working at like circuit level kind of software. And so it wasn't as relatable to the kinds of web development work that I wanted to get into. And that's kind of the nice thing about writing your resume, is you get to kind of direct the course of your career and say, no, this is what I want to do now. And so I'm going to show, appropriate experience based on what's going to be important to that company where I want to apply, because I want to take my career in that direction. And so I'm going to list things on the resume that show them I'm headed in that direction, so that I look like a better candidate to work at their job. And so I'm going to get in and mix all this stuff up. We don't really need references anymore on resumes. That's kind of like an old, outdated thing that's been gone for a long time. All right, so let's get into the kinds of things that we should have on the resume. So again, we're building a really long resume on purpose, because it's easier to delete things than to create it in the first place. It's going to be a lot easier to trim stuff out of this long resume to come up with a shorter version to go apply for that job, than to, constantly manipulate that one-page resume and keep it to one page. And, that job, I want to put that project on there, but the next job I apply to, I want a different project on there. And so I'm constantly making lots of edits. By doing it this way, where all the projects are on one really big resume, then when you make a copy of it to go apply for that job, you can just trim out the stuff that's not important. And so we're going to get to that. And so that's why we're starting with a long resume. It's easier to delete things than create things when it comes to this kind of stuff. So the first thing we want to do is we want to introduce ourselves. We got our name. You should have definitely an email address and a phone number. Now, the order you put them in will depend a little bit on the layout of the page. And I would say in the past, I've told people do not put location on your resume because it can subject you to geographic bias. This is most important when you're applying for a job where you're applying out of state and you're planning on relocating for that job. If you're applying for a remote job, it's okay to leave your location on there. If you're applying for a job in another location with the expectation that you're going to relocate there, I would actually take the location off of there, or I would put that city and state on the resume to make them think you're already there. And if they say, oh, I see you're based in St. Louis, Missouri, you want to be honest and say, well, I'm actually in the Denver region right now, but I'm relocating to St. Louis in 3 weeks. And so I'm looking for work in that area, and so I was reaching out to apply to your company. So that's going to kind of lower the risk a little bit of them going, well, you know, do we hire this person from Denver? Because what if they ask for relocation expenses? It's already kind of risky for a company to hire an entry-level dev, and some companies will not pay relocation expenses if they know you're an entry-level dev because they're already taking a risk on you. Some companies are more generous, but the companies that aren't as big and don't have as much money, they're sometimes less likely to relocate you or to reimburse relocation expenses, even though they're tax deductible. And so you can talk to them, and that can be like a whole negotiation topic that we cover sometime, where we talk about, you know, as a company, they can actually get a tax break if they reimburse your IRS allowed moving expenses. So if you're moving closer to the job, and they're reimbursing you for only IRS eligible expenses, which is like a moving truck and maybe a couple of meals, and gas mileage and things like that, then they can get reimbursed from the IRS for reimbursing you for those costs. They have to get all the receipts and stuff though. So if you lose a receipt, they can't reimburse you. Some companies will just give you like a one-time cash, you know, signing bonus kind of thing. Just say, well, here's like $5,000 that you can use to move. But be careful with that, because signing bonuses like that get taxed up front. And so you're not really getting $5,000, you're getting more like $3,500 depending on your tax bracket. And so you're not going to have all of that money to spend. Some of it's going to get taxed right away. Or you might be responsible to pay tax next tax season. And so just be aware of that if they do give you relocation money. But I'm kind of diverging a little bit off topic here. So is it okay to put the location on there? I think you can if you're already in that area and you want to show them that you're local, or want them to think that you're local, or if it's a remote job. Because if it's a remote job, then, you know, it's good to say like, hey, you know, this is the time zone that I'm in at least, so you know, like I'm an hour ahead or 2 hours behind or something like that. Now, some companies, like I'm based in Colorado, some companies will not hire people from Colorado now because we passed a law that said if you're hiring someone from Colorado, you have to stipulate a minimum salary for that job. And because of the law is a little bit confusing with how it's actually written and worded, some people are just like, we're just not going to bother hiring anybody from Colorado. And so you'll actually see job posts saying, you know, it's a remote position, but people in Colorado are not eligible. I think that's actually illegal for them to do that. My suspicion is that it's illegal because they're prejudicing against you, they're biasing against you based on location. And I don't know that they can legally do that. If you're in chat and you know, go ahead and correct me on that. But that's my opinion. So be careful if you are in Colorado of putting Colorado on your resume. Some companies will bias against that. And one way that they may do that is they may just say like, hey, applicant tracking system, go find everybody not in Colorado. And that's kind of the first pass of like who they're going to look at in order to interview. And you don't even know why you don't get a phone call. And it could be something as simple as having that location on there. So when in doubt, I would typically take the location off of the resume completely. So all they have is a phone number and an email address. And some people say, well, you know, what about the area code? 303, that's a Colorado-based area code. Well, my cell phone actually starts with 626, which is Pasadena, California. I haven't ever lived in Pasadena. I just had a 626 phone number from back in the day, and I've still got it today. And so I wouldn't worry too much about them kind of inferring from your area code where you may be. I wouldn't worry too much about that. And then on here, I would definitely put like a LinkedIn link, maybe a GitHub link, And some people would recommend, like, if you have like a read.cv or a polywork kind of URL, that you can put those links on here as well, just so that they can read a little bit more about you. Some people will put like a personal website or their Twitter or something like that. I generally don't recommend that unless your website is specifically about technical topics or things that that company is going to care about. And I would always avoid putting social media on here, like, Twitter or Facebook, unless like your Twitter feed is specifically like, I only tweet about technical things. Then by all means put it on there if you think it's going to help you get that job. Otherwise, I would take it off, because again, they can bias against you for that kind of stuff. They could start looking through your Facebook feed and look through old photos and go, I don't think we want this person on our team. And they bias against you and you have no idea why. You just don't get a phone call. So I would generally wouldn't put social media on there. But we're developers, so we should have GitHub at least. And if you got LinkedIn, put LinkedIn on there. Now, LinkedIn, you could spell out like your whole username. If you've got kind of the hexadecimal thing, after your name on there, you can actually go into LinkedIn and you can customize your LinkedIn name to get rid of that. I generally recommend getting rid of that and having like some sort of professional looking name. Now for me, I've got the Ian Douglas 736 because that's kind of my username everywhere, and the 736 is kind of an homage to my wife. Hello. And if you want the full story on that, you can ask. I'll be happy to nerd out on what the 736 is all about. And then for GitHub, it's just Ian Douglas. Now, make these actual links, like make these clickable links. If you need the space, like when you're going back through and you're formatting it, you could just do like LinkedIn : and then like this becomes the link. Like your username is actually the clickable link if you want to go that route, or you can just spell out the URL. Either way is fine. In the past, I used to tell people, like, always spell out the URLs, like, or make it really obvious that it's something clickable, like a blue font with the underline, like it's really clear that this is a clickable link. I've seen some people where they just make this bold or something, and they're like, I don't know why anybody, never clicked on that link. It's like, well, I didn't know that bold meant that it was a link. And so just make it really obvious that it's going to be a clickable link. In the past, like I said, I used to tell people, like, spell out the URL, because people used to get a printed copy of your resume on interview teams. Like the one company that I worked at, they would apply, we would get a digital copy of the resume, we would print out a copy and put it on the desks of the people that were actually going to be interviewing them. And so in the interview, they actually had a paper copy that they could write notes on. And you can't click on a link on a piece of paper. And so if they wanted to look something up, they had to type in the URL. But nowadays, pretty much everybody's keeping things digital, and you're more likely to just, the interviewer is more likely to get a forwarded copy of your PDF resume or Word doc resume. And so don't worry about just making them clickable links. That's really all you need anymore. But make sure that they're clickable. Same thing with your email. Make sure it's a clickable link that is actually going to email you from there. And then if you really want to put a title on here, what I would recommend is just call yourself like software developer or software engineer if you care about the difference between developer and engineer. I would not call yourself a junior dev or an intermediate dev or a senior dev. I would just say you are a software developer, because that is what you are. It's up to the company to figure out whether you're a junior, an intermediate, or a senior, but you are a senior, or you are a software developer. So just leave that as your title. You can put web developer on there if you want. If you are focusing on web development, you can put mobile developer on there if you want to focus on mobile development. Again, what you call yourself on that title is up to you and where you want to take your career. And so it's really up to you, like, how you want to introduce yourself in that regard. But having a title on there is kind of a good idea. And again, I'm going to get into formatting and stuff in a little bit. Nowadays, I would say get rid of the summary. You really don't need the summary on the resume anymore, especially for that first job. For the first job, they're going to care more about, do you have the skills and how have you used those skills, than seeing a little blurb about being an enthusiastic problem solver, blah, 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 full of buzzwords. They're just going to skip that summary completely and just go on to the skills anyway. And so I would say once you have professional experience, then you can write a summary about like where you're taking your career. But if you go watch the YouTube video that I made on doing cover letters, the cover letter would be a better way to sort of introduce like who you are and where your career is going and why you're aligned really well with the company and why they should contact you and hire you and all that good stuff. It doesn't need to be on the resume. So the resume is just a list of facts about you that are relevant to the job and nothing else. So from here, we're just going to go into our skills. And again, I'm going to kind of change this so that I look like an entry-level dev. Now, in the past, I just kind of jumbled all this stuff up. Nowadays, though, I highly recommend grouping these things up by sort of a category. And so we're going to start by doing languages. And then I'm going to do one on frameworks and libraries. And then I'm going to do like databases and tools. And then I might do like other tools or something like that. So what would I put under languages? Well, let's assume that I'm coming out of like a code school where I've done like a full stack program of some kind. And so I'm going to list Ruby, and I'm going to list JavaScript, and I'm going to list HTML and CSS, and maybe I've learned some SQL. As far as languages go, that's really all we're going to have as an entry-level dev. You're not going to have a gigantic list of things on here, and that's okay. And then from here, list out the frameworks that you've used. So in this case, maybe I've used Rails, maybe I've used Node.js. Now, it's important here that you don't duplicate and say Ruby on Rails, because Rails is the framework. You've already told me Ruby is a language, so you don't have to repeat that. So anywhere you would typically write Ruby on Rails, just write Rails. I can't write Python on Rails. I can't write JavaScript on Rails. And so just saying Rails, for those that are looking at it and screening it from a technical point of view, they know that Rails is Ruby, and that those kind of go together. Node.js, again, make sure that you're spelling things properly, like it's node.js. JavaScript has a capital S, like capitalization and proper naming of things is actually going to be really important on here. So maybe I've done Node.js, maybe I've done some React. Now, if I've done React Mobile or React Native and Redux and things like that, those would count as libraries, and so those would also belong on this line here. So I'm just going to throw Redux in here, pretend I've done Redux. So these would be like the kinds of things that I would start to build out here. As far as databases and tools, maybe I've used some Postgres. Again, make sure that you're capitalizing things properly. Now, the other tools that you would put on here would be other kind of like things that you've implemented. But for example, at Turing, we would have taught OAuth for authentication. Well, that's not really a database or like a usable tool, like a tangible, like command line kind of tool. That might be listed under other skills or something like that. And so I would list like OAuth 2.0 or something in here. But for databases and tools, I would list Git as a skill up here. Now, what about GitHub? Do you list GitHub as a skill? I kind of waffle on that one, to be honest. I don't know that GitHub is a skill. Git is definitely a skill. A command line, like knowing how to use the command line and how to like make your branches and merge pull requests. If you can do all of that from the command line, that's awesome. If you could maybe do like /GitHub on there, but really GitHub's just a web interface for the command line stuff. It's just a really convenient sort of way of looking through all your repositories and looking at GitHub issues and things like that. So I kind of go back and forth on whether that's a skill. But if you need things to fill out the page, put it on there. That's fine. What would be some other things in here? Maybe we've done some TDD. So let's use like RSpec as a testing tool. Maybe we've done like Mocha Chai for JavaScript. Maybe we've done some Enzyme for JavaScript. It's probably rounding out that list pretty well so far. Other database and tools. Let's see, what would be some other things that we could list in here that are actual tangible tools? Maybe I've done like GitHub projects. That would definitely be a skill. Or if you've used like Trello or Jira or some kind of ticket tracking tool, that would be a good thing to list on here. And then other skills could be things like agile methodology. If you've done like Scrum, stand-ups, things like that, you could definitely list those things out under sort of that other skill. So other skills, these are going to be like maybe, technologies that you've implemented or some of the like soft skills that you've learned along the way that you've picked up. CI/CD, Heartbender, thanks. CI/CD, I would probably put that in here. So I'm just going to throw like Travis CI and maybe Circle CI if you've done both. Yeah, you could definitely list those because those are actual tools. Like you can log into those tools and you can like tangibly do something with that tool. I can't really tangibly do something alone with just OAuth. I have to implement OAuth in something else. So other skills in here might be like API development and API consumption. Cool. So let's round it off there. I'm kind of going through like the kinds of things that we might have taught at Turing. As far as like some of the main kinds of concepts that we would go through there. And then from here, let's go into projects. I don't think there's anything else I really want to talk about for skills. And then, like I said, we'll go back and we'll kind of look at formatting and layout on here. Like, for example, I might throw bold on some of these tags here. And other skills, throw all that in bold. Or I'll just throw this whole thing in bold. Now, when it comes to projects, when we whittle this thing back down to one page, it's important that you want to pick the projects that are most relevant to their business. But the best way to do that is having this really long resume where you literally just list every project you've ever done. Now, when we trim it back down to one page, how do you know which projects are going to be most relevant to them? Well, hopefully you've done some network and some outreach and some company research to kind of get an idea of what might be important to them. From there, you can kind of figure out, okay, well, if they're an e-commerce thing, my little shop, maybe this was like an e-commerce thing, and hoodie season is, it was like a road trip weather tracker kind of thing. And Coder Dojo is just like a kids programming club, and we were building a little tracker to, keep track of lessons that the kids did and things like that. And so, if this company is about like an e-commerce kind of thing, then Little Shop, being an e-commerce, fake e-commerce kind of platform, should be the first project that I list on here. But then you can also get into things like, well, Little Shop was a group project, where hoodie season, or sweater weather as we called it at Turing, this was a solo project. So now we need to look at, well, if it's a remote job, you probably want to list more solo projects on the resume to show, hey, if you give me something to do, I can go get it done, and I can build some working code, and I can deploy it, and I can do all of that stuff myself. Here's proof. If it's, if the company says like, hey, our culture is really team oriented, and, we work together as a family, well, then you probably want more group projects on your resume. And if you don't know, or if it's going to be kind of a hybrid, like solo office, where sometimes you're working alone, sometimes you're working with other people, then you need to figure out, okay, well, how do I mix up the list on here? Like maybe I need like a pair project if I've done a project with one other person. Now, some code schools, you don't do group projects. And so all you have are solo projects. See if you can get together with a couple of other students and say, hey, can we just like mash a bunch of these projects together and just make one big project, and we kind of collaborate on some ideas together, just so we can have like a group project that we can put on our resume. And mull over some ideas and see if you can put something together as a small team, because that kind of teamwork really stands out to employers as well. Plus, it really helps answer behavioral type questions where they say like, hey, tell me about a time you were on a team and communication didn't work out or something like that. By having a group project on your resume, you've also got more experience then to answer those kinds of questions. So if you've gone through school and you've never done a group project, see whether you can get some fellow students together and build a group project of some kind. It doesn't have to be enormous. It could be like a 2-week project. It doesn't have to be like really super fancy. It just has to be something functional, working, where you can talk about your specific role on the team and the kinds of things that you implemented, so that you can answer those kinds of questions in the interview. So how we pick which of these projects will be important, like as we trim this back up. So for now, we're just going to get into like how do we actually build this out. Well, the first thing that I'm going to put in here is the name of the project, and then I'm going to start this with like a pitch. So this is kind of like our elevator pitch. Now, when you write this elevator pitch, you want to write it from the user's perspective. Like, what does the user do? What does the user use this project for? You don't, like, I would never get on an elevator and try to pitch like, oh, I built this really amazing Rails app. It's got this cool JavaScript front end. I got Postgres on the back end, and it's hitting this API, and it's doing all this really cool stuff, and ding, and the person leaves the elevator. And they're walking away going, so? And so you don't really want to do that on the resume. There will be a time and space on here that you'll see where you can talk about the tech stack, but the important thing that I like to see here for the project is sell it to me from the user experience point of view. This shows user empathy, and it shows that you can think about things from someone else's perspective. And so what we want to do here is we want to talk about, like, what is this site about? Like, who's the user? What are they doing on the project or application? Like, what is it going to do on their behalf, kind of thing. And so Little Shop, we could say, like, users can manage a fictitious e-commerce, inventory tracking system. So that's our pitch. So now we're if we were to actually pitch that to like a VC and say, hey, I'm trying to get some funding to like get this thing off the ground. Could I have like 50 grand? You can say, hey, I built a site where users can kind of go in and they can manage their inventory in an e-commerce platform where people can come in and like buy and sell things, and they got a shopping cart, and I've got that whole workflow built out, and it tracks all the inventory by count, and when somebody checks out, it decreases the inventory. Like, you can talk about that from a user experience point of view. And so that's one thing that I find is really important to kind of get across right away. Now, early on, you could probably say whether this was like a solo project. In this case, this one would be like a group project or something like that. This doesn't have to be in bold. But I find it is important to mention that it is a group project or a solo project, again, from the company's perspective when they're looking over the projects that you've built. Again, if they're very team-oriented or very team culture focused, you probably want to put group projects on here to say, hey, look, I can work as part of a team. Here's proof. Here's my contribution. If you go look at GitHub, you can find my contribution and see that I'm like, approximately equal or above and beyond everybody else's contribution, kind of thing. And then the user experience pitch. And then from here, we can just do bullet points about the tech stack. And so the first bullet point here might be like the tech stack that you use. Or so whether you spell it out as tech stack, or we can just do like tech stack, from this point of view. And you can say, well, this is a Rails application, and I did some JavaScript, and I used Postgres, and it was done with TDD. So that you don't have to like list all of the libraries and tools that you used all over again. You could just say TDD, and that's going to be enough. And also the TDD keyword, then, if someone's looking through an applicant tracking system and says, I'm looking for somebody who knows Rails and TDD, you've got TDD on here, test-driven development, and it's going to pick that up as a hit. And then from here, you could do links. Now, at a minimum, you should have like a link to your GitHub. And so I'm just going to like make one up here and just say this was like Little Shop or something like that. Now, where possible, I really like to see a live URL. Like, if you can deploy this somewhere, whether it's an AWS instance or Heroku or DigitalOcean or something, like if you can get this live somewhere, that's a way more powerful experience for somebody evaluating you as a candidate, because it shows not only can you write code and get it on GitHub, you can write working code and actually deploy that code live. Now, whether you deploy it using something like Travis CI or whether you just manually deploy it, you can speak to that in the interview. But by having a live URL on here, like let's just call this like Little Shop, like HerokuApp.com or something like that. And then again, make these clickable links. So again, for me as a hiring manager, if I saw a live link on there and go, oh, they've actually got this deployed somewhere, I'm going to click on that link. I would rather go interact with the site that you built or interact with the application that you built instead of just like browsing code on GitHub. And I always tell people, like, no offense to anyone here, but when I ran that Coder Dojo group, we had kids on there that knew how to commit code to Git and GitHub. Didn't mean the code worked. And so just having code on GitHub doesn't mean it works. I'm probably extremely unlikely to pull down a project of yours from GitHub unless it's super compelling to me. I'm not going to I'm not going to clone down your repo and like get it working, get it running just to go see what it is. And so if you can deploy that somewhere, that saves me a bunch of hassle. And remember, the whole thing about resumes and applying for that job is you're showing me how you're going to make my life easier. This is a great example of how to make my life easier. Give me a live link on your resume that I can click on and go experience what you built. this is all we need for our project. And so we could do that for all of our other projects. And so hoodie season, this was a solo project. And we could say users can, how do we say this? They can basically build a road trip. And so they can plan a road trip and see weather information at their destination when they arrive. And so the whole idea with this project is like however long it was going to take you to get there, you were looking ahead at the weather and go, this is what the weather's going to be like when you arrive. And then from here we can say the tech stack. And let's say that this was a JavaScript project and we built this in Node.js and Express. Now I didn't mention Express up here. And so if I use a tool and I mention that in my tech stack, but I don't mention it up here, that's okay. They may look at that and go, well, why did you name Express down here when I don't see that as a skill? It gives you a talking point in your interview and say, well, I was able to build the project using Express, but I wasn't comfortable like answering really deep technical interview questions about that as a topic. I'm much more familiar with React or much more familiar with Node.js, just kind of plain Node.js functionality. And so I didn't list that as a skill. They're going to appreciate that kind of honesty. They go, okay, cool. I won't ask you any questions about Express. And so it's okay to have a skill listed with a project or a skill in your work experience that is not part of your core skill block. Again, the core skill block that I'm going to see up here are things that are relevant to me and that job post. And we're going to get into like how we trim this up in a little bit. So let's say that we did JavaScript, Node, Express, and let's say we did Mocha. Well, actually, I think Mocha are like front end, not back end. So trying to remember the TDD tool that we used. TDD Express Node. Trying to remember what library we used. If anybody from Turing is on here, hit me up in chat and remind me what we used on this one. Trying to remember what library we used. First steps. There we have npm install integration tests. I don't easily see what library they're using. I don't remember what it was. We'll just say like Mocha for now. But I'm pretty sure that that's not right. And then again, we would give some links to like GitHub and a live URL of some kind. And then like Coder Dojo, this was like a pair project. And so when I would look at this as a hiring manager, I would look at this and go, okay, a pair project, you did like 50% of the work. In a group project, you did like a fraction of the work depending on how many people were on the team. So you had a 5-person team, you did 1/5 of the work is my expectation. And so I can kind of surmise like, okay, well, you didn't work on the entire thing. And so I might say, okay, well, based on this group project and based on the tech stack, like what part of the project did you actually work on? This could be a good bullet point to put like, what was your responsibility? So this could be where you add like a bullet point of like, this was my contribution on that group project. So you could totally list that kind of stuff out. So we'll say Coder Dojo was a pair project, and we could say mentors could track student progress in a simple web application. And then our tech stack, at the time, I wrote this in Python and Flask, and we put it up on Google Cloud. But I don't have any of these skills up in my skill block up above, so I'm just going to make something up here and say that this was also a Rails app, and I use Postgres instead of Google Cloud Database. And that's pretty much it. So again, I don't have to say Ruby or Ruby on Rails. I can just say Rails. And anybody who's technical that knows Rails and kind of the environment around that, they're going to know, okay, that was Ruby. And if they don't know, they'll ask. Book club, this could be like, oh, and then, we would have links on here as well. where we have like GitHub and then like live URL of some kind. And then as far as formatting goes, like make sure that the formatting is consistent with how you're laying these out. Now, one thing that I'm not doing on these projects is saying how long it took me to do the project or whether I'm still maintaining the project. I think those kinds of details you can save for the interview. So they can say, hey, tell me about this Little Shop project. You're like, oh yeah, that was like a 2-week project, or in this case at Turing, I think it turned into a 5-week project, or I think it was a 5-week project, where you can say like, we started at this point and we kind of built it out, and then we had like additional extensions, and so it was this really long project. I don't think that kind of stuff needs to be on the resume, because anybody looking at the resume is going to go like, okay, well, you built a 2-week project. That's actually going to sound not very awesome. It's like, oh, you only spent 2 weeks learning this, or only 2 weeks implementing this thing. But when you're talking about it in an interview, you can say like, yeah, I actually didn't know anything about Postgres at the time. And so we were learning Postgres, and so I had to implement the table structure and all the joins to come up with these really rich like metrics reporting, for the admin side of the tool. And they're like, oh wow, you did all of that in 2 weeks. And so you can describe some of that on here on the resume if you want to. Or this would be a good place where, admins could pull up rich SQL-based reports on like inventory, sales, And now when I go to apply for that job, I can decide which of these points I want to keep, for an e-commerce platform. And so now I get to choose which of these points I want to keep on the resume. And so list lots of things on here if you want. Put lots of bullet points for these projects. You're going to trim it back down later. So let's imagine that I did that for the remaining projects on here. But you want to try to list as many projects as you can, no matter how small or mundane you think that project was, or, oh, that was a project that I did and it was just this tiny little command line app. Well, if you're applying for a job where you're going to be writing command line scripts and you're going to be doing things on the command line, that would be a great project to put on your resume. And so list all of the things. Put all of the libraries that you've ever used, languages that you've ever used. As long as you're comfortable talking about it in an interview, list it in a skill, list all those projects on here. And then related work experience. Well, in this case, if we're pretending that we're a new grad, we don't have relevant work experience, we just have work experience. Now, this only matters if you've actually been professionally employed by somebody. But everything counts here. Retail jobs, restaurant, like service industry type jobs, like any kind of job is important to list on here. You're showing that you are employable, that somebody has employed you and you are trusted as an employee. That's an important thing to put on here. So no matter what the job was, put the job on here. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to take off all these technical jobs, and I'm going to list, now in this case, because I'm going to have people watching this that are going to be like new computer science grads. And so in this case, I'm going to put like an internship on here. So let's just imagine that I did an internship for a local company in Denver. I'm just going to make one up, and I'm going to say like Acme Inc. And then I'm going to want like a date on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set a right margin or a right tab stop. I'm going to pull that all the way over here to the edge. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put like, what was my internship? We'll say it happened during the summer. So I'm going to say like June 2021 to August 2021. Now, whether you do like 3-letter months or spell out the whole month is really up to you. And I'm going to say software development internship. And what we want to do here is when we talk about our work experience, is we want to show off the things that the companies are going to care about. Things like time management, project management, how you saved time doing something. And what we want to do here is we want to use really strong action verbs to kind of talk about what we did at that job. And an action verb is going to be like I developed a thing, I produced a thing, I deployed a thing. Like use tech-centric action verbs for what you want to present here. So I can say I created, like a 5-page web application for managing project documentation. The other thing that you want to try to do as much as possible is quantify things. And when you quantify things, you want to use the digit for quantifying things. Don't spell out the word 5 like F-I-V-E. It's actually harder to read and understand and process from a human brain point of view. So just put the actual digit on there and get the quantified information as close to that action verb as possible. Now, you might say, like, I optimized, team workflow, improving output by 50%. The reason that you want to try to get that closer to the bullet point itself is because as humans, when we're reading bullet points, we're only capturing about the first 5 or 6 words, and we're not even paying attention to the rest of the line. And so that's also good incentive to keep these bullet points short. But, if you say, well, I improved the output by 50%, so how do we get that 50% closer to this? So we could say, like, improved by 50%, team workflow by optimizing, such and such. And so now that 50% is much closer to the beginning of the bullet point. And so we've got our strong action verb and our quantify information really close together as much as possible. Now, it's not always going to be possible because of grammar, but keep in mind, bullet points don't have to be grammatically correct. They're meant to be short. We generally don't want to go too close to where these dates are. So I generally tell people only go about 2/3 of the width across the page and then stop there. And again, bullet points, they're only going to read the first 5 or 6 words anyway. So bullet points should never wrap around to another line, in my opinion. They should just be short and succinct and just the facts. Now, we could list lots and lots of these things, and so I'm just going to pretend that I've listed lots and lots of bullet points for this job. Let's imagine that I've done lots and lots of things at this internship. This is also why you want to keep track of every little thing that you do on a project and keep track of every little thing that you've done during an internship. You want to keep track of all of this stuff somewhere. Write it down somewhere. I actually found a resume that I had to write to apply for a promotion at a job, and I actually had to write down all the things I did at the company. I actually forgot that I had done most of that stuff at the company. And I actually found it while I was kind of researching, how do I get all this content in a really long resume? And I was looking back at it going, oh yeah, I did work on all that stuff. Wow, I did a lot there in a couple of years. And so keep that stuff written down somewhere. Sites like Polywork and Reads TV are really good platforms for tracking that kind of stuff. All right, so we're going to say that was our internship, and then other work experience. So I'm just going to switch this over to kind of this edit mode just so it gets rid of the margin there for a minute. And then I'm going to say that I'm going to put my retail work experience. So, I put myself through college mostly by working retail. And so I've got some retail experience. So I'm just going to say I don't know. Clothes R Us. And I worked there. Let's say that I worked there before going to school, or actually during school. So let's say that my internship was part of school. So let's say that I worked there. Let's say that I still work there. So to present. But when did I begin working at this fake job? Let's say that it was. Let's say I started right before college, so I've been there several years. So let's say September, 3 years ago. So that would be 2018 to present. So again, I'm just making this stuff up, but for yourself, you'll actually build these things in with real dates. Now for consistency, because these months up here were 3 letters, I don't want to put SEPT. I just want a 3-letter representation of September. And then I could say retail sales and customer service. And then again, we could list out some things here handled cash and refunds for customers, managed stockroom inventory and tidiness, and let's see what else. Let's say I worked on sales displays and outfit matching for seasonal promotions. I don't know. I'm kind of making some stuff up based on what I did back in retail days back in the 90s. And again, let's imagine that I've got, you know, a whole lot of things that I did here. So I'm just going to like paste all these bullet points. Now on the final resume, we're not going to keep this many bullet points, but we want to try to remember all the things that we did at these jobs so that we can keep what's going to be important to the company where we're applying for that job. And then after this, I'm going to list my education. I'm actually going to put my real education on here and say that I did that from September of 2018. And I'm going to say to present because I'm currently, let's say that I'm currently a student there, but I'm getting ready to graduate. The other way that you could do this for, like if you're still in school and you're about to finish, you could say like expected graduation, you know, or something like that. Or you can just say like, let's say we're going to graduate in December. So we'll just say like December 2021. So anybody looking at that is going to go, oh, that's only like a couple of months from now. You must be getting ready to graduate. Something like that. And then software development, focus on blah, blah, blah. And we'll do like some bullet points around this. And then let's say I've got like a certification in something. So let's say that I got that relatively recently, but let's say I got it while I was still at college. So I'm just going to do like AWS certified architect or something like that. And then the date I got that, let's say it was, you know, back in March 2020 or something like that. And then, you know, focused on AWS services, deployment, application tool chains, and I'm going to put application tool chains and data pipeline on a second line. I could have kept it here on this line, but it's getting really close to this date. And there are reasons why we don't want our text to go under those dates. You can kind of see that visually it's created a kind of a column here without actually forcing it into a column by making sure that our text doesn't really go underneath those dates as much as possible. And so in this case, I'm actually going to put this on a separate line. And then for consistency, because I'm starting all these other things with capital letters, I want this to also be capitalized. All right, so let's say that I've got, you know, all this stuff, but let's say that I had like a third job, actually worked at a restaurant, so we'll call this like burger, we'll call it like, you know, gut burger or something like that. And let's say I worked there before I went to college. So I might say, well, I started, you know, June of, I don't know, 2015 until like August of 2018 or something like that. And then I was just like sales and food preparation. Oops. And then again, we can just put like, you know, general food preparation, self-training, promoted by watching self-directed training videos. So I actually worked at Wendy's back in the day, and this is how we actually got promoted, is we had to go in the back and like actually watch the training videos and then demonstrate to the manager we could do the job, and then we got promoted into that kind of role. So general food preparation, cash handling, you know, drive-through window, you know, general cleaning. I'll just say like restaurant cleaning. Again, I'm just kind of making some of this stuff up, but like you'll actually put real stuff on here for your job. Okay, so we've got like a page and a half, and we haven't really done any layout from here. Let's, just for the heck of it, let's imagine that I've got like 2 more projects on here. Because again, we want to start with like a really big resume and kind of trim it down from here. So all I do is I kind of just created a very simple Google Doc, and I just kind of like blurbed all this stuff out onto a Google Doc. I haven't really formatted it at all. So now I'm going to do is I want to show you how I would actually go through and like format some of this stuff as well. And what's going to be important then when we actually trim this back down to 1 page. So, oh, the other thing that I want to mention about education. If you went to a boot camp, I would list the boot camp as education, not as experience. I do know some boot camps, they kind of waffle and they're like, yeah, it's okay to put in there, like just say it was an internship or like an apprenticeship or something like that. It does kind of misrepresent your time at that boot camp. And so I generally would advise against listing a boot camp as experience. Unless the boot camp specifically has a work program after the fact or as part of the program, then it is experience. But while you're just doing the training portion of the boot camp, that should be part of education. And I would list that separately. So you would have like, I did the training for 4 months and then I had like a 1 month work placement or something like that. But then the work placement would be like the internship that we listed up here, where the education would be like down here at the bottom. So please be honest about that and don't misrepresent yourself, because that actually does look bad to employers by listing boot camp as employment history. And I see that all the time on LinkedIn when I connect with people. They're like, oh yeah, I totally worked at this boot camp as a student. It's like, well, you didn't really work at the boot camp then. You were a student at the boot camp, so don't list it as experience. List it as education. For those that have been around the stream and know my appreciation for Jonan and the Jonan show, you should totally check out his stream. He tends to stream on Wednesdays every week or every other week. And I had Jonan on my very first stream on this platform back in July, and we did a resume review, and his whole thing was like, oh, you should put like hobbies and stuff like that. Like you should totally put that you're into karate or something. It's like, well, is that really appropriate on a resume? My argument was, if it's important to the company, by all means, put it on the resume. His argument was like, well, as the hiring manager, it is important to me to know that you're human and that you've got interests outside of work. I think that kind of stuff could come up as part of a phone screen or as part of the interview itself. Like, hey, tell me something about you that's not on your resume. Well, now I can tell you I'm into karate or, whatever. I'm into 3D printing or something like that. But if 3D printing isn't relevant to that company, I'm not going to put it on my resume. It's not important to them. It's less likely to get brought up, and all it's doing is taking up space on the page. So my opinion is that skills or hobbies rather, don't really belong on the resume. Now, the caveat on that is once you have actual professional work experience in tech, like you've worked a job for a year, what's basically going to happen is your work experience is going to get listed above your projects, and you'll have fewer projects on the page because you'll have actual professional experience that you're going to want to highlight instead. And so again, I'm writing this resume from the perspective of you are a new grad, you don't have technical work experience maybe other than an internship. And so that's kind of the premise that I'm going with for this resume. So then as far as like layout goes, here are a couple of things that I would do. I would go into page setup, and for me personally, I would put the top margin at 1/2 inch and the bottom margin at 1/2 inch and your left and right columns at 0.75. This will just push it up to the top a little bit more. Now, I usually tell people start out by highlighting everything on the page and set everything to be 10-point font. And then from here, we can kind of correct everything else. So highlight everything on the page. So Command A or Control A, depending on which platform you're on. It's Command A if you're on a Mac, Control A if you're on Windows or Linux. You're just going to highlight everything, and you're going to set it to 10-point font. That should be the font size that you try to use on your resume all the time. From here, then, we're going to go in and we're going to increase things like our name. We could make that as big as 20-point font. Now, your title and all of these headings could be a slightly larger size. So I'm going to go with 14-point font for these. So my title and all of these headings, I'm going to make 14-point font. But everything else stays at 10-point font. I don't change any other font size. I've seen people use tools, and the one that I dislike the most is called Credle. Credle will let you put as much content on the page as you want, and they basically shrink the font, and they continue to shrink the font to make it fit. I've actually seen some resumes built with the tool Credle where the font size was like 8-point font or 7-point font because the person wanted to write so much content on the page that the font had to get smaller and smaller and smaller to make it fit. I shouldn't have to zoom in on your page to read anything, or heaven forbid if I actually print it out, I don't have to get a magnifying glass to read what got printed. So I always recommend just keep it a 10-point font. If you really need content on the page and you really need to make it fit, 9-point font, but I highly discourage it. I think 10-point font is perfectly acceptable, and that's really all you need. Now, how we lay this stuff out could be up to you. You could just use some white space. I've seen people do like a table, you know, where they put their contact info up here in the top right corner, and that's typically what I would do. And so I'm going to do something like that here. So I'm going to start by just inserting a table. And I'm just going to do like a simple 2x1 table. Now, unfortunately, Google Docs puts this blank line up here that we can't get rid of. So the only thing we can do here is change the font size of that line to be like a 1-point font, and that kind of shrinks it up from there. We also want to go into the table properties, so I just right click on the table itself and go to table properties, and I want to turn off the table border. So you can set it to 0 and or set the color to be the color of the page, and then it gets rid of that. So now I'm going to put my name and my title in that left field, or that left table cell, and I'm going to put all this other contact information over here in that right table cell. Now that right table cell is also 20-point font, so the first thing I need to do is change that to 10-point font and then paste that content in there. And now I can come in and I can set these things on multiple lines. And that's kind of the starting layout of what I'm going to go with here. Now, if you really pay attention, like if you got a ruler and line this up, you'd see there's a bit of a gap here. And so again, that's just table properties. You can kind of come back in, look at your table properties, and you can set your cell padding at 0. And then that kind of scoots the name right over to that same left edge as everything else. And now I can bring all these other things up here. And now there's my summary of skills. Now, how you play with this white space in here is really up to you. But this is kind of how we're going to get started. And this is our long form resume at this point. So we're going to put our workplace. Oh, the other thing I should probably pretend to do is put location in here. So say this was Denver, Colorado. And now I'm going to bold the name of the company, but not the location. And I'm going to make my role italic. And we'll say that this was Arvada, Colorado. And make that italic. So again, we want to be consistent on this stuff. We'll say Gutberger. We'll say that this was also Arvada. I have had some people ask in the past, should I put my high school on here? Unless you're fresh out of high school and you haven't even gone to college or something like that, I probably would not put high school on here. I don't think that that's really necessary. Unless there's something that you learned at that high school, like you took computer science specific classes at that high school, then by all means list that as your education. Now, under education, we want to format that the same way that we did our work experience. So I'm actually going to keep some white space in between. Actually, no, I'm going to take that out. So consistency-wise, I have the heading, and then the content immediately starts on that next line. So I want to do the same thing with work experience. And then down here for education. So similar to work experience, the name of the place is going to be in bold. And, you know, the certification or whatever that you got is going to be in italics. Now, in this case, AWS was the certification that I got. And so I'm just going to make that bold in its entirety. And then I want to make sure that these bullet points kind of pop in there the same as everything else. So all my bullet points are kind of formatted and lined up the same way. All these dates are still kind of, you know, off on that right margin. Now, this is longer than one page, and that's okay. This is just us getting started on some really basics to get going here. So again, we would want to make sure that these are links. So when you come in here and you want to make that a link, let's see, we're going to go to link. And what we want to do here is we want to paste a link, but for an email, you want to start with mail to. Mail to : and then immediately paste in your email address. You don't want a space in there. And I'm going to apply that. And now when they click on that, it'll actually like launch their email kind of thing. And then for LinkedIn, we'll actually put in HTTPS, linkedin.com, and Ian Douglas 736, and apply that. And then for GitHub, we're going to stay consistent with this. And I'm just going to have my username be a link to my GitHub profile. All right, and then down here, let's imagine that this was actually like a real link. I just want to show you, like, you know, make sure that these things are actually links that they could actually click on. Now, just a quick note about Heroku, for example. Heroku is actually built on top of AWS. They build their platform on top of AWS. And part of how they can give you the time away for free for their server is by shutting down your app when it's idle. So one danger is that having this link on your resume, if I click on this link right now and it's a real Heroku app, it could take anywhere from 30 seconds to 60 seconds to actually spin that instance back up. Meanwhile, the browser is just sitting there spinning. So one thing I would probably do is you can find ways of like activating these things and keeping them sort of awake throughout the day by just like hitting the website on a refresh like every 30 seconds or every minute or something like that, or every 5 minutes. And that'll keep the application awake. But be aware that if you do that for more than a certain number of hours in the day, Heroku may start charging you money, or they may shut off your app until you upgrade to a paid plan. And so I would, if you're going to use some kind of automated timer to keep the app awake, keep it awake between like 9 to 5 kind of hours when somebody might be looking at your resume on a professional basis. If they're looking at it after hours and it's idle, it's probably not a big deal. But during those 9 to 5 kind of hours, again, 9 to 5 wherever they are. And so if you're on like California and you're applying for a job in New York, you're going to want to start pinging that thing at like 6 a.m. through like 3 p.m. or something like that, or 2 p.m. I guess it would technically be 5 p.m. Eastern time. But you want it to be awake during 9 to 5 their time. So whatever time zone they're in, you want to make sure that you're kind of pinging that app every 5 minutes or so, just to keep it awake. But again, just be aware that Heroku may come back and say like, hey, those are, you're using a lot of server time and we need to start charging you money. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to like put these same links in here just to show you what this kind of thing might look like here. So I'm just listing like all of my projects on here, or all of my fake projects. We imagined that we had lots and lots of projects that we worked on. Cool. All right. Well, that's kind of where we're laying this out. Let's actually put the tech stack and our links as bullet points. So that'll kind of make the user statement, or our user empathy statement, kind of stand out a little bit more. Okay. So now this is our kind of our long form resume. So again, if you didn't tune in at the beginning of the stream, I was kind of using this riddle that I learned as a kid of how do you make a sculpture of an elephant? You start with a big block of stone and you chip away everything that doesn't look like an elephant. And this is kind of what we're doing here with a resume, is we're starting with a really big resume so that we can trim it down to one page for a given job post so that we can see how we could look like the best candidate for that role. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to say like this is our fake resume, like really long form resume, and I'm actually going to go in and add a bunch more detail on this ahead of the workshop that I'm doing on Thursday. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how I'm going to make a copy of this, and we're going to say, like, imagine we're looking for a full stack developer who knows Python and JavaScript and has worked on like web applications or something. Now we don't have Python experience on this resume, and that's okay. I'm going to show you how you can still apply for that job and still look like a good candidate for that job. And so we're just looking for like full stack developer. Now, do you put full stack software developer as part of your title up here? I mean, you could say like full stack software developer, but that might not be applicable all the time. And so the long form resume, we want to keep kind of generic as far as what we're doing there. When we actually trim this down to one page that I'm about to show you, I'm going to show you how we're going to make that specific to look for one company. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to File, make a copy. And now this is the copy of the resume that we're using to apply for that company. Now, when you copy this document, it's going to use the name of the document as the downloadable file name. And so generally you want to follow something like Ian Douglas, and I'm just going to do like Widgets R Us 2021. So you want your name, the name of the company to which you're applying, and some date indicator, and it could just be the year, it could be the month and the year. And I'm going to say okay on that. So now I've got a whole copy of that resume. Now it's not going to sync up on that old copy, but I still have this old copy over here in this other tab. But in this tab, what I want to do is I want to trim this back down to one page for the kinds of projects and skills and things like that that are going to be most important to the company Widgets R Us. And so now I need to come in here and we're imagining they're looking for a full stack developer who knows Python and JavaScript. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to give myself the title of full stack software developer. Am I misrepresenting myself? Well, not really. I've done back-end and front-end on, as part of my skills. Now, I don't have Python, but I do have JavaScript. And so what I may do here is rearrange these a little bit to say I'm a JavaScript developer who also knows Ruby. They're going to look at that and go, okay, well, we're looking for someone who knows Python and JavaScript. You're showing us that you know JavaScript and you also know Ruby. So you've got our one of our top picks, and you have kind of a similar adjacent skill to Python. When human beings read a list like this on a resume, they think, psychologically speaking, the things on the left that kind of start the list, you know the best. And so what we want to do is we want to show them those things and then show them like, oh, and I also happen to know this other stuff. And so, for example, if I was just looking for a JavaScript-based job, I could still call myself a full-stack developer, or I could just call myself a software developer. And I'm going to say I'm a JavaScript developer who also happens to know Ruby on Rails. That's not misrepresenting myself, because I've got JavaScript on my resume. I've got projects that use JavaScript. I can speak to how I built out JavaScript. And so I'm not misrepresenting anything. I'm just putting it in a different order. So when a human looks at this, they're going to go, oh, they actually know JavaScript, really, really well. And they know SQL like not as well. So they're kind of reading it like, left to right. You know this well, and then as it goes to the right, you know these things less well. And so what we'd want to do here is say, okay, well, all of the non-JavaScript stuff needs to be at the right side. And so again, I'm going to take Rails, and I'm going to put it down at the end of the list, because I want to look like a JavaScript developer. All these tools are JavaScript tools except RSpec. So I'm going to move RSpec down to the other side of Rails, because I want to look like a JavaScript developer who also knows Ruby on Rails. So I can keep all of this stuff in the same order. I can keep all of this stuff in the same order. None of that has to change. But now I look like a JavaScript developer who knows Ruby, as opposed to I'm a Ruby developer who knows JavaScript. So if I'm applying for a job that's looking for Python and JavaScript, I've got one of their top choices as my number one skill, or what appears to be my number one skill, and then I have an adjacent skill where I know Ruby, which, when they look at this, they're going to, okay, well, Ruby and Python are similar enough, you're going to get up to speed on Python. During the interview and during those phone screens, you need to sell them on like how you're going to apply that knowledge. But now when I come into these projects, I don't want to list a Rails project first. I want to list a JavaScript project first. So very similar to how I rearranged and put JavaScript on the left side of that list, I want to do the same thing here where I list that hoodie season project first, because it is a JavaScript-based project. And so you want to make sure that, let's say this was like some other project. I'm just going to call it like Project Alpha or something like that. If that was also a JavaScript project, I'm going to list that one second, because again, I need to look like a JavaScript developer who then has also built these other projects and other tools. But I want to show that I've done JavaScript only projects, because I want to show that I've got strength in that, in at least that thing that they were looking for. Now, do I need all 5 of these projects? Probably not. And so when we trim this stuff down, we're going to take out the projects that maybe aren't as relevant to them. At a minimum, I would say you want probably 2 or 3 projects on your resume, if possible. Now, from a work experience point of view, if I'm looking for a full stack developer job and I had an internship, so generally what you want to do here is you want to start limiting the bullet points by how important that job was. So if the job is really important to their job post, you want more bullet points left on your resume. If the job is not as relevant, you want fewer bullet points. You don't want to draw as much attention to it. But if the job is highly relevant to the job to which you're applying, you want more bullet points, because it's going to show like, hey, look at all this info. You need to read about me at this job. And they'll pay attention to that. So let's say this, if this was like another tech internship, and this was an internship, but it wasn't quite what they were looking for, I might narrow this down to just like 2 bullet points, where this one, which was, far more important and far more relevant, I'm going to list 4 bullet points. And then they're going to look at that and go, okay, well, because of how these things are sort of weighted on the page, they're going to see like this was more important. Now, we're kind of getting dangerously close to 1 page here. and some of the stuff looks still kind of big on the page. Maybe I don't need to list gut burger on there anymore. But my education doesn't quite fit either. So what do? Well, I did make these headings 14-point font. So I could drop these down to 12-point. That's not going to give us a tremendous amount of extra space on the page, though. So keeping that kind of thing in mind, like this isn't really drastically helping us in any sense. So now we need to start making sort of concessions on what's really important on here. Well, I've got 4 projects on here, and I need just a little bit of space, so maybe I don't need that 4th project on the resume after all. And look at that, now I'm down to 1 page. If I can trim all this stuff up here, I've got a 1-page resume. And so that's how we make a sculpture of an elephant. We take a long resume and we trim it back down to 1 page by only leaving what's relevant to that company. Now, are all of these skills relevant to the company? Maybe not. So maybe they don't care about, mocha chai or something like that, or maybe they have specific kinds of tools that they would want to know about. Well, again, if you've got lots and lots of tools that you've used and lots of languages that you've learned, you're going to have all those on there, and you're going to trim it down to just what you think they're going to care about. But you want to look like the best candidate for the role by trimming out all the stuff that's not important to them, and then trim that back down to 1 page. Heartbender in chat says, as a junior dev, I would expect experience to be greater than projects. Yes, depending on what that experience is. So in this case, I pretended that I had an internship. And so in this case, that tech internship could be more important than project-based work, depending on how long the internship was. And so you could get into like tech work experience, in which case I would just take the retail work off completely. But again, it is still important to show that you've been employed somewhere. So maybe we need to move this down to like other work experience or other experience and just list that under there. Again, we need this to be consistent, so this would be 12-point. And then in this case, we would move that experience up above the projects. Again, it really depends on what you want to highlight and what you want to be important to that company. If you've got an actual internship, an actual relevant technical work experience, then yeah, you want that up higher on the page. And so I was just kind of showing, like, as an example, people coming out of like CS programs, they will have done internships, or very likely to have done an internship. Somebody coming out of a boot camp probably hasn't done an internship. They're mostly just going to have projects to rely on. And that's why I put projects above the work experience. Cool. But I appreciate your input on that, Heartbender. I appreciate it. So that's how we trim it back down to 1 page. So we start by having a really long resume, and we trim it back down to 1 page. Now, you're going to have like the job post side by side with this thing, and you want to look for those keywords. You want to look for things like, what kind of framework have you used? What kind of testing have you used? What kind of deployment have you used? You want to make sure that anything they're asking for, or as much as possible, it doesn't have to be 100%, but as many of the things that they're asking for in that job post, you want to be on the resume. The applicant tracking system then is going to kind of pair you up and go, hey, this resume hits on a lot of the keywords of that job post. It's like an 80% fit or a 90% fit. You're more likely to get in front of the HR person. I have seen people in the past actually put like a whole bunch of keywords down at the very, very bottom of their resume in a white font, so it's invisible to a human reader, but the applicant tracking system would pick up all those keywords. I say that's a little shady. I would generally try to avoid that if possible. You don't want to get kind of called out for doing something like that. Now, again, we are getting pretty dangerously close to like having a really full page. So if there is something else on here, again, this might be where I drop all of this other content down to 9-point font instead of 10-point font, just to give us a little more room. Or maybe I could, shrink some of this stuff up a little bit more. Like maybe this contact information could be my 9-point font. Maybe my name doesn't need to be 20, maybe it could be 18, just to shrink it up just a tiny bit. In this case, it didn't move the page at all. But now I could bring that up a little bit. So there are little adjustments that you can make. Once you get it close to 1 page, then you can start going in and nitpicking and play with your layout a little bit more. But by starting with that really long resume, you're going to list every skill, every project, every detail about every job you've ever had. And then when you bring it down to 1 page, you're just deleting stuff that's not important. Now, if you think of something like while you're writing, it's like, oh, I should talk about such and such. Well, if you're going to talk about it, on that one-page resume, go put it back on the main long-form resume as well, so that you don't have to remember next time, like, oh, what was that thing that I put on that job that one time? Now you got to go hunt through a bunch of other resumes that you've submitted. But it only took us a couple of minutes to trim this back down to one page. Like, compared to the time it took us to write this long-form resume in the first place, this took most of an hour. Trimming it back down to one page took like 5 minutes, maybe a little more than 5 minutes. And that was with me explaining like why you want to trim things out and why you want to rearrange things in a certain order. So if you've got that long form resume, you're going to be able to trim that back down to one page really quickly. And that's going to save you a lot of time as you're applying for these jobs. You're going to have a lot more flexibility around what kind of job are you applying to, how are you going to get a resume together. It takes 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to put that resume together. And now you've got a customized resume for that company. I would say don't overthink the resume though. I think like if you're spending more than like 10 or 15 minutes like super nitpicking on the resume, you're probably overthinking it a little bit. And you could probably, take a step back and go, okay, why am I overthinking this? Maybe I don't need to like over explain some of the stuff on the resume, and I'm just going to go ahead and send it. And then you can write the cover letter to kind of pair with the resume and so on. So again, as a new grad, I generally wouldn't put a summary on the page, and don't list hobbies. I don't think that they're needed for a new grad type of role. Once you have work experience, where your work experience is then going to start detracting from the projects, because project work won't be as important once you get professional experience. Then you could put a summary on there and talk about like where you're taking your career. As a new grad, you don't really know where you're taking your career yet. You're looking for that first job. You may have strong interests and strong perspectives on where you think you want to go, but I would generally reserve that summary until after you've got your first job. And then you can come back and you can kind of rewrite your resume, add that summary at the top and say, this is what I want to be as a developer. This is where I'm taking my career. And then you can kind of like shape your resume around more about you, but your resume really does need to be what's important to them as a company. Heartbender asked in chat, are the holidays a bad time to look for a job? That's a really good question. I need to just take a quick drink here. Been a while since I've talked for like an hour and a half straight. I'm a little worried. I got a 2-hour workshop to do on Thursday. I'm worried I'm going to lose my voice partway through. But this is actually a good walkthrough because I need to explain all this stuff much faster than I've done here on the stream. But are the holidays a bad time? Yes and no. Some companies start to run out of budget by the end of the year, and their budgets don't refresh until the new year. Some budgets, I mean, depending on the company and when they sort of close their books and what we call a fiscal year. Some of them refresh all their budgets in January. Some don't refresh until February or March. And so some people, applying for a job in quarter 4 or Q4, which is kind of the October to December timeframe, they sometimes think, well, it's a bad time of year because everybody's budget is exhausted. Nobody's hiring anyway. I think there are plenty of jobs in tech. There are a lot of companies, that are hiring. And so I think you can still apply. I don't think it's dangerous. In fact, in 2020 and 2019, when I was teaching at Turing, we actually saw some of the biggest hiring sprees happening in Q4 than other parts of the year, and historically what we had typically seen in Q4 where hiring had slowed down. I think in 2019, there was kind of this resurgence of like a lot of hiring going on. And then everything kind of like came to a screeching halt in the spring and the summer because of COVID, and a lot of companies stopped hiring. They put hiring freezes on. But then as kind of COVID started going and people started realizing what it was like to work remotely, they're like, hey, we can do this. Like, we can work remote. This is going to work out just fine. And we still have all this work. So we got to start hiring again. We got to get people on the team because we got all this work to do. And so we saw Q4 2020 really skyrocket as far as hiring goes. I don't foresee that changing right now. I think that there are still a lot of jobs out there. There's still a lot of jobs, a lot of people looking for tech workers. Unfortunately, though, a lot of companies, they're not specifically targeting entry-level devs. They're really hoping to get senior-level devs, maybe intermediate-level devs. I think entry-level devs still need to apply for some of those jobs. you still need to be able to say like, hey, you know what? If you can't find senior level devs, like you got me, I'll be a little bit cheaper. You need to give me a little more mentorship, but I'm still a software developer. You can still hire me. And this is also why I was saying, like, you know, when you're titling yourself up here at the top, don't call yourself a junior dev. Don't call yourself a junior developer. Just call yourself a software developer. That's what you are. Let the company figure out what level you are and then go from there. And so I would say for Q4, go ahead and apply. Like, find companies. And worst case scenario, if they're not hiring, start that networking so that when their budget does refresh in January or February, they've already got you on their mind. And they're already like, hey, I know this Heartbender person. I've been chatting with them. You know, they've been keeping me in contact about some projects that they're working on the side, and they sound like a really cool individual. You know, if we got that role opening up, like, can we just call them, or like, you know, maybe they'll DM you and say like, hey, we got this role opening up, like, send me a resume, I'll get it into HR. Maybe HR is going to say, well, you have to apply for that job through their like main application system anyway, and that's fine. But at least then you can, you know, reach out to the person that you've done networking with and say, hey, I've applied. Can you go talk to HR about my application? So yeah, that would be the process I would follow. So try to apply for those jobs anyway. Even if the job says you need like a year to 3 years experience, I would apply anyway. Just call yourself a software developer on the resume. Don't call yourself a junior. They're going to look at all of that and try to determine your work experience anyway. You could get phone calls anyway. So don't be afraid of them looking for experience. Go apply for the job anyway. And then Heartbender asks, how do I determine what I'm worth? That can be a little tricky too. There's a website, what is it called? Levels.fyi, I think. Yeah, levels.fyi. This is one site that a lot of people will use as you're kind of looking through like the different sorts of levels, but these tend to be more for like FANG kinds of companies. So like Google, Facebook, Microsoft. But there are also a lot of other companies on here that don't necessarily follow like the same sorts of levels. But I think it'll still give you a pretty good idea. Like, you know, GitHub's on the list. So here's GitHub. Let's clear off some of these other ones. And then you can come in and say, okay, well, software engineer E1. Like, what is E1? Well, here's their approximate estimate. Now, that range may vary a little bit based on location of the company and where you're located, whether you're working on site, whether you're going to be remote. Things like that. But I think this is a good site to at least get an idea of where to start asking them about those salaries. So I would check out levels.fyi. You can also look at cost of living estimates. Some companies are really good about posting information about their salaries. And then you can adjust based on cost of living. Like, there were some Bay Area companies when COVID hit, they're like, well, you don't have to come to the office anymore, but if you relocate, you know, far away, we're going to adjust your pay according to where you're living now, because we're only paying you this ridiculous salary because you live in the Bay Area and it's expensive to live here. And so they actually got in a lot of trouble. A lot of companies like Facebook made headlines because they were threatening to lower people's pay, still expecting the same kind of work, same quality of work, but lowering the pay simply because they moved out of California, because they were working remote anyway. And I think a lot of companies kind of relented as far as like lowering those pays, but some companies did. Some companies adjusted the pay according to where you were located. Some companies will do that based on where you're located now. They may say, well, if you lived in Seattle, we're going to pay you, you know, $140,000. Well, in this case, it's Atlanta, Georgia. But, you know, because you live in Montana is like a much cheaper cost of living, or Michigan is a much lower cost of living. So we're going to pay you like half the salary out there because that's our adjusted cost of living. You could argue for some of that. You can totally negotiate your skills. And say, like, this is what I know that I'm worth. Like, if I'm worth that money in this area, then it doesn't matter where I actually physically reside, I'm still worth that amount of money. And so it really does come down to the kinds of skills that you have and the kind of job that you're applying for and the kind of career you want to have in order to work out that value. I think it's important that people understand what they are worth. I was listening to someone recently, someone's podcast, I believe, where they were talking about negotiating. And they were saying, well, you know, you always want the company to say a number first. And so you can use phrasing like, I don't really know my value. And so, what are you offering for the role? And I think that can sound a little dangerous by wording it that way. I don't think you want to give the company the impression that you don't know your value. I think you just need to really hold fast and say like, let's get through the interview process. Let's let you figure out what my skills are worth. But if you can share like what the pay range is for the role, I can let you know whether like that's in my ballpark. And then we can just move forward from there. We can talk about final numbers. Like if we get to that stage and you want to make an offer, we can talk final numbers there. But if you can tell me a range, I can let you know, yes, that's in my range, or, I'd like it to be a little higher, that sort of thing. So there are ways that you can kind of delicately sort of skirt that. I actually had a Q&A question about how to dodge that salary question. So you can go find that on YouTube. You can go check out the YouTube archive and find that. It's also on the podcast as well. Cool. Well, that's pretty much all I had for the resume side of things. Harbinder, if you got other questions, I'm happy to just hang out on the stream and answer some more questions for you. If you just want to chat about that kind of stuff, or if anybody else on the stream has questions about resumes or just interview prep in general, drop them in chat. Happy to just kind of hang out a little bit and chat a little bit more and help folks out if I can. Let me know if you got questions. And so the other thing that I was saying, like when you make a copy of that resume, now I've called it like Ian Douglas widgets RS 2021. So now when I come in here and I go file, download as a PDF or a Word doc. So which one do you download? I would actually download both. And kind of the rule that I've been telling people lately is if you're applying for a job online, send the Word document. And if you're sending the email to a human being, send a PDF. The PDF will maintain all the layout and the font and things like that, where a lot of applicant tracking systems do a better job parsing Word documents. But when we go ahead and we download that document, now you can see the actual file name. Well, actually, you can't see it because it's in a different window. But the actual file name that it came up with was Ian Douglas widgets RS 2021 .docx or .pdf, depending on the format that you're actually going to download. And so you never want to call it just like resume or updated resume or 2021 resume, because you're going to download it as that file name, and then when it goes into their system, it's actually got that very generic name. So you always want to name it like your name their company name and then like a date indicator of some kind. That would be my recommendation for naming that file. All right, from Heartbender in chat, I'm about to start the process of looking for a new job. Cool. I've been at my dev job for about a year and a half. I like that my job is remote and I get to work with the security team, but I don't like the team environment. Aside from our daily work, I never get to interact with the other devs or get any mentorship. I feel like I'm not learning more than what I'm getting paid. Okay. So let's break this down a little bit. So you're looking for a new job, or you've made the decision to start looking for a job, or you're thinking about starting that process. So that's great. You get to work with the security team. All right, cool. If that's a direction that you want to take your career, then start shaping that resume and start, thinking about how you want to word things on your cover letter, specifically around those kinds of topics for whatever direction you want to take your career. When they ask, like, why are you thinking about leaving? You generally don't want to start talking about all these negative things. You just want to talk about, like, hey, I decided this is a direction that I want to take my career, and I want to find a company where I can spend time interacting with more people and gain more mentorship to really grow these skills, because this is where I want to take my career. And so I think it's important that you be careful about not being too negative about why you're changing jobs, or what was it about that company that you decided you didn't want to work there anymore. You generally want to kind of downplay that a little bit, and instead just talk about where you're taking your career in the future and why they're a good fit for that. So if there's something else about the team and the environment, this is where now when you're researching other companies that you want to work for, with the networking and with the outreach, like as you kind of reach out to people that work at some of these other companies where you want to apply, you can say like, hey, this is kind of the team environment that I'm looking for. What's your company like? Or can you tell me what your day-to-day is like and how you interact on your team? Or you can ask very specific kind of questions to them, like, if you were in a scenario where, blah, 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 you can almost ask them like the behavioral style interview questions, like, hey, have there ever been a time on your team where like communication went really sideways and like nobody was getting along? They might say, oh yeah, that happens all the time. Well, then maybe that's an environment you don't want to bother applying to. Or if they say like, no, we actually get along really well and we communicate really well, but we got one guy on the team that's not as good, or, this other person over here, they don't really talk as much. It's like, okay, well, now you got to kind of make a decision for yourself. Is that an environment where you want to apply? Again, that's up to you. When it comes to things like mentorship should happen at the job, no matter what job it is. And I think that companies need to be aware of how happy their teammates are and whether their teammates are getting the growth that teammate wants to get versus how the company needs them to grow. So they're two different things. Like, the company is going to need you to grow in certain skills in order to keep that job and be effective at that job. But then you also have your own personal interests as far as what you want to learn and where you want to take your career. Sometimes those are the same things. Sometimes they're very different. Like, if you work for an insurance company and you really want to get into mobile gaming, well, that interest is completely different. And so they're not going to give you mentorship around, mobile gaming, because that's not what they do. But they may have, a really strong interest in training you about data pipelining and data security and things like that, because that's important to their company. Well, if that's also important to you, if that's also important to you in your career, then that's something that you're going to be regularly seeking out too. But the company needs to make those opportunities available on your behalf. Like, they need to be able to make those opportunities for you if those are lined up. And that really does come down to communication between you and, whichever team leader or manager that you meet with on a regular basis, to say, hey, by the way, I'm really interested in this, or hey, I feel like I'm not getting very good mentorship in this particular area. Is there someone on the team that I could sit down with on a more regular basis? That's how we build trust on a team, is we have to have kind of those tough conversations sometimes and say like, hey, I'm not getting out of this what I want. Like, this is what I need as a developer. This is what I need as a person. Is there a way to make this happen? I know we're remote, and so it can be a little trickier to kind of make these conversations happen, but this is what I need. Is this a possibility for the company? And if they come back and say no, then it's a clear sign that you need to go find a new job. And then it's not really a surprise to them when you resign. But if you just, you go find a job and you walk in tomorrow and hand in your notice and say, I'm done, I found another job. They're like, we didn't even know you weren't happy here. It kind of gives you a bit of a bad reputation because you didn't communicate about it yourself. And especially if you're bringing up like, we're not mentoring, we're not sharing that information, we're not communicating well, you're also contributing to that by not communicating that that's what you wanted or needed on the job. Now, if you have communicated that and it hasn't come through, then that's on them. And again, this is just kind of fueling why you need to go find another job in the first place. Now, when it comes down to saying like, I'm not learning things above like where I'm being paid, I sometimes hesitate a little bit, especially when I hear from entry-level devs like, oh, I'm thinking about changing my job because I can't learn anymore at that other job. It's like, well, really? Like, is it really that you can't learn anything else, or just the people there aren't willing to teach you anything else? Because if you've got people that have been there for 5 years or more, they've got all kinds of things they could potentially be teaching you. You just need to you don't have to you need to have those opportunities available to have those conversations and talk about, how to share that information and share that information with each other, and have those conversations, have that training, have you document that stuff, document it, circulate it around to the rest of the team. Say, hey, I'm sitting down with Ian and Ian's teaching me all the following things. And so I'm writing out all these notes, and here are the notes for everybody else if you want to learn. That's how teams get better. That's how teams work really well together and kind of build each other up. And so those kinds of things can be really important. It really comes down to communication and trust. And sometimes the trust happens because of the communication. And so if you feel like they're not making the opportunities for you that you should have, you need to ask for those opportunities. If you have asked and they're still not making it possible, then it is definitely time to find a new job. But I would say be careful about the mindset of just, I've learned everything here I possibly can, and I'm not getting mentorship, so I'm just going to go somewhere else. When you walk into that other job, keep in mind you may be walking into another environment where mentorship isn't great either. Or they may mentor you for the first 3 months and you think it's amazing, and then 3 more months later you realize you're not getting the mentorship anymore. It's like, well, now I'm not getting mentorship here either, so do I change my job again? So I think it comes down to, how do you communicate around like what you need as a developer and what you need from the team, and see if they can make that opportunity. If not, see if you can make that opportunity and say, hey, you know what, I really want to learn more about this particular topic. Could we get together as a team and just do like a virtual lunch and learn? Like we all eat lunch together and like somebody share like a 10-minute talk about that subject so that I can learn a little bit more, maybe other people. I actually did that when I was at Grad. I actually started a lunch and learn thing where I think it was like once a month. It's like, all right, well, now Ian, you're up. You know, can you talk about a topic? And it got popular enough that we started doing it, I think, every other week. And, you know, sometimes it was tough to find somebody to sit in and actually teach a topic, but there were so many engineers on the team that there was never really a shortage of knowledge. It was really who had the time to actually sit down and prep something and make time available to make that happen. And so again, it just comes down to communicating to the team like, hey, I really want to grow in this area. Can anybody teach me about that? Or can I shadow you or pair with you or just like watch you work on something where I can ask you some questions about that? I think that that can do a lot just as far as like team building in and of itself. So I think it really starts with communication. And follow-up says, it's not that I learned everything. It's just they're not teaching me, and I know there's much more to learn. Well, then it comes down to why aren't they teaching? If there's no time to teach because there's a lot of deadlines, then sometimes, yeah, that happens. If that's been like going on for like months and months and months and months, like I would say more than 6 months where like literally no one has the time to sit down with you, then that's where you need to approach management and say, hey, I really want to learn and grow in these areas because it's important to me for where I want to take my career, but everybody's so busy, these opportunities aren't happening. Is there anything that you as a manager could do to help facilitate that? Because I feel like I'm not growing as much as I would like to be, and I really want to keep growing as a developer. That's showing them now that you're taking initiative, but also that you're communicating well what you want and what you need as a developer. Now, if they come back and go, oh, we don't have time for that. Well, again, that's kind of a signal then that maybe you need to find another job. But I would have that conversation with your workplace before just looking for another job and surprising them with a resignation. I think having that communication up front, I think is really important for your own reputation. And just, you know, now when you go to that other job, you can do so with the satisfaction of like, I tried all possible avenues. It wasn't that I was just sitting and waiting for them to come to me and say, hey, Ian, do you want to learn this thing? I went to other people on the team and to management saying, I want to learn the following topics. How can we facilitate this to happen? And have other people on the team help with it. If they're too busy, that's entirely different. If they just flat out refuse, it's like, no, I don't want to teach you that stuff. Well, then you don't want to work with those people either. You need to work with people who are willing to share their knowledge. And because I do know some people that work at companies where like, I know this thing and I'm the only one that knows this thing, therefore I have job security. And if I teach you now, I could lose my job because you know this thing. And now I'm not needed anymore. I'm not like that important person anymore. There are some people in the workplace that think that way. And it's unfortunate, but those people do exist. But from a company's perspective, they don't want what we call a single point of failure. They don't want people on the team who are the only person that knows that thing. And also for that one person, you know, sometimes it feels like they can never take a vacation. They can never take time off. They can never take a day off. They can never take like a full 2 weeks off or whatever because something's going to fall apart and they're the only one that knows it. And they know if they go on vacation, they got to take a laptop with them because they're going to be on call even though they're supposed to be on vacation. It's not a great way to live. It's not a great way to kind of build your career around that kind of stuff. I think it's important that teams share what they know and share how to do things. And so, yeah, I would start the conversation with the company. Start with your team lead if you have a team lead. If you don't, talk to your manager. And if they kind of like sound like they're refusing to help, like, no, like we're going to be way too busy until January. Well, you know, there are industries where, you know, Q4 is their busy industry or the busy time of year in that industry. Like e-commerce, for example, really picks up now this time of year. And so there are companies that are like, no, we really don't have the time until retail slows down in January. Then we're going to have all kinds of time to sit down and do training and all that kind of stuff. So maybe it's worth just sticking it out. But if they're like a kind of a general industry where it's, you know, kind of the same pace all the time, then you need to say like, hey, like there's no real busy season going on. Could somebody make some time to teach about these following topics? Because these are things I really want to learn. It shows that you're taking initiative. And I think that that's an important thing for your own career as well, that you're willing to like step out and ask for specific help and not just say like, hey, I'm just sitting here like regurgitating the same thing over and over. I really want to be learning more so I can contribute more to the team and take on more responsibility. Managers are going to be like, oh, really? And so, yeah, I would say take the initiative and start that communication and start that conversation with them. It might surprise you what'll happen just by having that conversation with them. Jen Develops, good to see you in chat. Hope you're doing well. Hope your weekend is good. How's that new job going? You started the job last week. How's the new job working out so far? Cool. If there are other questions, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, we've been going for kind of a while now. We're coming up on 2 hours, the longest stream I've had in a long time. I think since I had Jonan on the stream. I think that was the last one where we did like 2+ hours. But yeah, I kind of wanted to walk through like how do I build a resume as a junior dev. So hopefully that was a good example and kind of a walkthrough of like take a big resume, trim it down to 1 page. That's all part of this workshop I'm going to be doing this week. So this is a good walkthrough for me as well, because I need to be able to trim this content down a little bit so I don't go way over time on them, because I also want to talk about LinkedIn and how to use LinkedIn. And I'll be sharing some of the secrets that we learned from Catherine Lewis a couple of weeks back. And you can check out the YouTube archive for that chat with Catherine Lewis from LinkedIn. So Harpinder said, what about formatting the resume? So we kind of went through and we did format it a little bit. I don't think it needs any more formatting than this. This is like a really easy to read kind of layout. It doesn't need to be super fancy. It doesn't have to have a ton of color. It doesn't have to like be really blinged out or anything like that. I think if you are kind of on the, like if you're doing like user interface, user experience kind of work, where the user sort of, or like there's like design elements in what you do as a developer, then yes, you want to show that a little bit in your resume. But I would generally not make the resume like too overcomplicated as far as the layout goes. You know, a little bit of bold, a little bit of italic, sprinkle it like hot sauce, as we say. If you use hot sauce everywhere, then it kind of loses its impact. If you use just a little bit of bold, a little bit of italic, it can actually make things kind of stand out and pop. So I don't know that you really need to format much more than this. Again, this is just my own preference. I need something that's simple to read, because as a hiring manager, when I look at that resume, I'm looking for like, what do you know? Where have you used that skill? Where did you learn that skill? And do I think you've learned it well enough to warrant giving you a phone call? Because when I'm looking at this resume, I'm looking for a reason to say no. Once I get you on the phone, I'm looking for a reason to say yes. So the resume is really like, you got to get the point across in a hurry that you are the right fit for that job, for the kind of role, for the kinds of skills that they want. You need to show them very concisely. I have the skill. These are the projects where I've worked on, where I've used those skills. They're more likely to call you and get you at least a phone screen. And then from there, it's up to you verbally to kind of win them over from there. And Harpinder said, yeah, I was curious if you go crazy and style it. At most, no. I might do like a left column, like one of my old resumes, I did like a left column where I kind of highlighted the main points of my skills. Like I focus on architecture and scalability and things like that. But I stopped listing like I know the following like 20 programming languages. Because again, when I'm applying for a specific job, I want to highlight just the skills that are specific to that job. And so I might start with this really big resume. I'm still going to trim it down to 1 page myself. I've been doing this for 25 years. I can still make a 1-page resume for a job. Because I'm only going to highlight what's relevant to them. Now, I might still show like, you know, I currently work at Stream and I did like 4 years at Turing where I did like a ton of stuff. But if the role at Turing isn't as important to them as my time at Stream, I'm going to have way more bullet points about what I do at Stream or what I did at Stream before I went to Turing. I'm going to show way more about that because that's important to them, not necessarily what's just interesting to me or interesting to know about me. That resume needs to be about what's important to them and how I have what's important to them. Cool. Glad you got a lot out of it, Harpinder. Cool. I think I'm going to wrap it up for the night. So I can give my voice a bit of a break. I still have to break up the Q&A video from last Sunday. I got the individual videos trimmed out, but I got to extract the audio and get the podcast stuff uploaded as well to start rolling out some podcast stuff. But I appreciate everybody hanging out in chat. If you do have other questions, you can always reach me through the website, techinterview.guide. Let me throw my LinkedIn up here in the chat. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to help out in LinkedIn DMs. I tend to respond to that the fastest, even over email. The workshop that I'm doing is actually in Denver on Thursday, and it's for a code school in the Denver area. Just because they're local, they actually want me to teach in person, so I'm excited to kind of teach in person in front of people again. So that'll be Thursday afternoon, and then Thursday night, oh yeah, I should probably talk about this some more. Thursday night, got Dan Moore, Letters to a New Developer. He wrote this really great book. It's a whole bunch of letters that he wrote about, like, these are things I wish I knew as a new developer. And Dan's a really excellent mentor. He's a big part of a Ruby meetup group here in the Denver region, specifically in Boulder. And I'm looking forward to having him on the stream on Thursday. And I got a handful of other folks lined up. I'm going to have some folks in November. We're going to sit down. We're going to chat about like just other kinds of tech jobs that are, you know, you can still get software development training, but then go get other jobs that are maybe not full-time software development kinds of roles. Like what other kinds of roles are out there and how they got into those roles. And how they got that first job in those other roles and still had to kind of pitch the idea of like, hey, I learned software development, but I really want to do this other job. Like, how did you sell them on that kind of stuff? So that's going to be the theme of that, but that's a couple of weeks out. Let's see, what else do I have coming up? I'm going to be doing a workshop on like stock equity and like what is equity. So if you get a job offer with equity, like what do you do about it? Like what's it actually worth? I've had some people ask about negotiation tactics as a topic, so I may dive in on some of that this month. We'll see how that goes. But if there are topics that you'd like me to talk about and discuss, please reach out on LinkedIn or through email. You can find my contact info on the website, Tech Interview Guide. Just look in the menu bar. You'll see a bunch of links down at the bottom on how to contact me. We've also got a Facebook page. I think it's facebook.com/techinterview.guide. You can find me on Facebook. You can message me through there. Yeah, check out the podcast. Let me know what you think of the podcast audio. I did have one user report that the podcast audio was a little quiet, but I don't know if it was just them. Seems to play okay for me. But have a listen. You can get information about that from this link. Oops. Try that again. Over here. Dang, podcast. So got a whole page, techinterview.guide/podcast. It's up on Apple, Google, and Podbean. And Spotify. So if you go follow it on any of those platforms, leave a review, so that'll help other people find it. Yeah, feel free to give me some feedback on the podcast as well. I'm always interested in getting feedback from folks. Cool, I'm going to wrap up. That's 2 hours. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. Appreciate it, and we'll see you on Thursday with Dan. Have a good night.